It was a perfectly normal Saturday morning when it happened. I was enjoying my coffee on the porch, listening to the birds chirp, and honestly, just soaking in the quiet, peaceful vibes of my suburban neighborhood. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and everything seemed right in the world. That is, until the world came knocking. Well, more like shouting at me from the sidewalk. I had no idea what was about to go down. You see, in my neighborhood, everything was supposed to be perfect. Green lawns, freshly painted houses, neighbors who waved at each other and occasionally brought over a casserole. Typical suburban life. But then, the HOA, Homeowners Association, came in with their ridiculous rules about how everything needed to look. If your lawn wasn't up to their standards, you'd find yourself in their crosshairs. At first, I didn't think anything of it. My grass was a little long. Okay, maybe it was a bit longer than the other lawns in the neighborhood. But it wasn't an eyesore. It was nature. It was wild. It was, dare I say, a lawn with character. But apparently, to the HOA, this was grounds for an impending crisis. I didn't see her at first, the HOA Karen. She was lurking somewhere down the block, armed with a clipboard and a mission. And that mission? To make sure every blade of grass in the neighborhood was as perfectly aligned as a row of soldiers. It didn't matter that my lawn had some personality. To her, it was just another problem to solve. The first sign of trouble came when I found a letter on my doorstep. The envelope was official looking, the kind of paper that makes you immediately think, well, this isn't good. I opened it with a sigh, wondering what new community guidelines they were going to try and force upon us this time. As I read, my jaw nearly dropped. It was a formal notice. Notice of violation. Your lawn is in violation of the HOA's guidelines for yard maintenance, it began. Please trim your grass to an acceptable height of no more than 3 inches by insert date here, or face a fine of $100. I stared at the paper, completely stunned. I mean, who sends a formal letter about grass? I looked at my lawn. It wasn't a jungle. It wasn't out of control. It was just a little shaggy, a little untamed, kind of like me, to be honest. The irony was that they had no idea how much care I'd actually put into my lawn. There were patches of clover, dandelions, and even a few wildflowers that were thriving. If anything, my yard was a mini ecosystem. But the HOA didn't see it that way. I took a deep breath. Okay, I thought, maybe I'm overreacting. It's just a letter. It's no big deal. I'll cut the grass, they'll leave me alone, and life will go on. But as I walked back to my porch, I noticed a shadow looming at the edge of my yard. And then I saw her, HOA Karen, clipboard in hand, marching straight toward me like a general leading her troops. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp and authoritative. "I've noticed your lawn is not in compliance with HOA standards." She gave me a look that could freeze a sunbeam. I gave a tight smile and nodded. "Yeah, I got the letter. I'll take care of it, no worries." But she wasn't satisfied. No, Karen had more to say. She went on about how my yard was an eyesore to the neighborhood, and how unkept lawns would bring down property values. She even mentioned something about setting a bad example for the other homeowners. I couldn't help but think, is this what the world has come to? A lawn dictatorship? Here's the thing. I get it. I understand the importance of maintaining property value and making sure the neighborhood looks nice. But there was something about Karen's delivery that just set me off. It wasn't about the grass at all. It was about the control, the entitlement, and the fact that someone thought they could dictate how I maintained my own property. I stared at her, trying to keep my cool. "I'll trim it soon," I said, but in my head I was already plotting my next move. And then it hit me, the perfect, brilliant idea. What if I didn't just trim the grass? What if I turned this whole situation into something better? Something they wouldn't be able to ignore? Maybe I wouldn't just bend to their rules. Maybe I would change the game entirely. That's when I decided to turn my lawn into a wildlife habitat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Stay tuned for how this little lawn issue turned into the ultimate HOA power move. But for now, I just stood there, watching Karen walk away with a look of disapproval, completely unaware of what was coming next. This was only the beginning. I'm sure Karen thought she had me. I mean, she came at me with that stern look, the HOA letter in hand, and her clipboard like she was the judge, jury, and executioner of suburban life. She was probably expecting me to drop everything, rush to the nearest lawnmower, and start hacking away at the grass to make it as neat and sterile as the rest of the cookie-cutter homes on the block. But that's not what happened. No, I wasn't going to play by the rules this time. I had something else in mind, something even Karen couldn't have predicted. It started with a simple thought. What if I didn't cut the grass at all? What if, instead of trimming everything down to a perfect uniform height, I let it grow and grow until it became something completely different? Something that couldn't possibly be ignored. At first, it felt like a rebellious idea, one that was maybe a little crazy. I mean, here I was, sitting on a ticking time bomb. The HOA was breathing down my neck, and Karen was ready to pounce at any moment, armed with her threats and fines. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. I wasn't going to bend to someone else's idea of what my yard should look like. I wasn't going to let a stranger tell me that my lawn needed to be perfect just to fit into some cookie-cutter suburban fantasy. So I let it grow. And when I say grow, I mean I didn't touch it for weeks. I let the grass get wild. Like, really wild. The kind of wild that made neighbors stop and stare. The grass went from a little shaggy to overgrown, with weeds creeping up and vines starting to snake their way across the yard like they were auditioning for a Tarzan movie. It wasn't just grass anymore, it was a jungle. The best part? The longer I let it grow, the more it started to take on a life of its own. What was once a neat, boring lawn turned into a patchwork of wildflowers, dandelions, and a mix of grasses that looked like they belonged in some hidden corner of the Amazon. Vines began creeping up the fence, reaching toward the porch, and small critters, rabbits, squirrels, and even a few birds, started making their home in the grass. It was a mini ecosystem, a living, breathing jungle in the middle of suburbia. And I loved every minute of it. But here's where things got interesting. It wasn't just about making a statement. It wasn't just about defying Karen and the HOA's impossible standards. I had another plan in mind. You see, there's a little-known secret I discovered during my research. You can actually certify your yard as a wildlife habitat. That's right, turn your overgrown lawn into a protected space for animals, insects, and plants. I'm not talking about some vague nature-friendly designation. I'm talking about being officially recognized by the National Wildlife Federation, NWF, the gold standard for conservation certification. As I dove into the process, I realized this could be the ultimate move. Not only could I thumb my nose at Karen and the HOA, but I could also take this opportunity to actually make a positive impact on the environment. Who knew a rebellious act could turn into a conservation project? The more I researched, the more it made sense. By allowing the grass to grow and creating a habitat for local wildlife, I wasn't just defying the HOA's ridiculous rules. I was actually improving the environment. I was creating a safe space for pollinators like bees and butterflies, providing shelter for birds and small mammals, and supporting the health of the local ecosystem. It wasn't just a lawn anymore, it was a sanctuary. Of course, I could already hear Karen's voice in my head. She'd probably call it a nuisance, or a blight on the neighborhood. But that's the beauty of it. I wasn't following her rules, I was making my own. And if I get certified, if I get that official stamp of approval, I'd have the ultimate trump card. What could Karen say? That my yard was certified by the same organization that backs some of the most respected environmental efforts in the country. Good luck arguing with that. So I went ahead and filled out the application. I measured the space, noted the types of plants and animals living there, and checked all the boxes for what the NWF needed in order to approve my yard. And then I waited. While waiting for the approval, I sat back and watched as my neighbors started noticing the change. At first, they gave me those sideways glances, the kind where they don't quite know whether to call the authorities or ask for gardening tips. But as time went on, something incredible happened. More people started appreciating the wild beauty of it all. Kids loved it. They'd run past the yard, pointing out the birds, the butterflies, and the flowers. Neighbors started asking about the vines climbing the fence, and the backyard squirrels became the unofficial mascots of the street. And I just smiled to myself. Karen, on the other hand, she had no idea what was coming next. The moment the thought crossed my mind, I knew I had stumbled onto something incredible. I wasn't just going to sit back and let Karen's oppressive HOA rules take away my vision. No, I was going to play the game on my own terms, and in doing so, I was going to flip the script on the whole suburban neighborhood dynamic. I had already transformed my lawn into a jungle, an unkempt, wild oasis of untamed nature. But now, I wanted to take it one step further, way beyond just rebelling against Karen. I wanted to make my overgrown lawn official. That's when I discovered the hidden gem. I could certify my lawn as a wildlife habitat. Yes, you read that right. A certified wildlife habitat. The National Wildlife Federation, NWF, had a program that recognized yards that fostered biodiversity, supported pollinators like bees and butterflies, and created safe spaces for small animals and birds. My backyard jungle, with all its vines, flowers, and overgrown grasses, could actually be recognized as a sanctuary for local wildlife. It was a complete game changer. I'm not sure what I expected. Maybe I thought it was a long shot, but once I started looking into it, I realized I had already been doing the right things without even knowing it. The process was pretty straightforward. The NWF had a clear set of guidelines, and it turned out my chaotic, unruly lawn already met many of their requirements. I needed to provide food sources for wildlife, shelter, water, and places to raise young. I had it all: bird feeders, butterfly bushes, native plants, wildflowers, a little pond, and even a few trees that were home to birds and squirrels. I just had to put it all together and prove that it was actually benefiting the wildlife in the area. Filling out the certification application was oddly satisfying. I wasn't just responding to Karen's HOA demands. I was creating something real. I was turning my defiance into something positive, something that could actually make a difference. It felt like a small rebellion, sure, but it was also a chance to show that there was more to a yard than just neatly trimmed grass. My yard wasn't a problem. It was a living, breathing habitat that was helping to protect the environment, one butterfly at a time. I checked all the boxes on the application. My yard had native plants that provided food for local insects and birds, and I had created shelter spots with piles of leaves and fallen branches. The water feature I added wasn't just for aesthetic value. It was a perfect spot for wildlife to drink and bathe. I had also ensured that no pesticides or chemicals were being used, which meant the local pollinators could thrive without fear of toxic sprays. I was checking all the right boxes, and I felt this intense sense of pride as I submitted my application. As I clicked submit, I leaned back and smiled. This was no longer just about me versus Karen or the HOA, it was about something bigger. I was creating a space that would help protect wildlife, support biodiversity, and educate others on the importance of sustainable, eco-friendly practices. The wait for approval felt like forever. I couldn't stop imagining what would happen when the NWF confirmed my yard's status. I knew that once it was official, it would be impossible for Karen, or anyone from the HOA, to dismiss it. My yard would be more than just an eyesore to them. It would be a certified sanctuary. And suddenly, I felt like I held the winning card in this ridiculous suburban power struggle. While I waited for the approval, I began to tell my neighbors about the transformation I had made. At first, they were skeptical. Some of them even thought I had gone a little crazy. But soon, curiosity got the best of them. They started asking questions. What are all those vines doing up the fence? How do you get those birds to come here? That pond looks amazing. Does it attract frogs? And you know what? I was more than happy to share. People started to appreciate the beauty and tranquility that came with a yard that wasn't just manicured to perfection. It was a space for life, for real, tangible, and thriving life. Finally, the email came. I opened it with bated breath. My heart skipped a beat as I read the first line. Congratulations, your yard has been officially certified as a wildlife habitat by the National Wildlife Federation. I couldn't help but laugh. I had done it. I had not only beaten the HOA's ridiculous lawn regulations, but I had also done something that was good for the environment and created a haven for local wildlife. My yard was no longer just an overgrown mess. It was an officially certified sanctuary. The next day, I proudly displayed the certification plaque in my front yard, right next to the wildflower patch where the bees love to hover. I knew Karen would see it, and she did. The next time she walked by, clipboard in hand, she paused and stared. The look on her face was priceless. What could she say? My jungle wasn't just a random act of rebellion anymore. It was recognized by one of the most respected organizations in the country. My neighbors, who had once raised an eyebrow at my wild landscaping, now looked at me with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. They were beginning to see things differently, too. Maybe I wasn't just making a statement. Maybe, just maybe, I was starting a trend. Karen, however, was speechless. And that, my friends, was the sweetest victory of all. The moment I saw Karen walking down the street, clipboard in hand, I knew it was about to get interesting. She was heading straight toward my house, the exact spot where my officially certified wildlife sanctuary stood proudly, a wild jungle in the middle of suburbia. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to face the ultimate plot twist. Her days of threatening me with fines and nitpicking over grass height were over. And she was about to see the full extent of what I had done. I could already picture her face, the tight, disapproving frown as she noticed the vines creeping over the fence, the wildflowers flourishing in places where grass used to be, and the little bird bath tucked in the corner, alive with activity. To her, it had to look like chaos. But to me, it was a thriving ecosystem. And now it had a shiny official NWF certificate to back it up. I could almost hear her internal monologue. This can't be happening. This lawn is out of control. As Karen approached, clipboard raised like a weapon, I casually stepped outside, trying to act as nonchalant as possible. I knew this moment was inevitable, the moment when she would finally come to confront me. But this time, I wasn't going to shrink. I wasn't going to apologize for turning my lawn into a wildlife haven. No. I was standing tall, proud, and ready to defend my decision. "Excuse me," Karen began, her voice dripping with that all-too-familiar air of authority. "I've noticed that your yard has gotten even more unkempt since our last conversation. This is unacceptable. The HOA is already aware of your violations." I bit my tongue to keep from laughing. Violations? What violations? As if the HOA had any say in how I chose to manage my own property. I stood there, arms crossed, ready for what came next. But then, just as I was about to respond, Karen's eyes locked onto something. She squinted, her gaze narrowing as she took in the sight of the small wildlife habitat sign I'd placed at the edge of my front yard. The vibrant green and yellow sign proudly displayed the words, "Certified Wildlife Habitat, National Wildlife Federation." For a second, she froze. I could almost hear her brain processing the words. Certified? By the National Wildlife Federation? It was like I had hit her with a sledgehammer of legitimacy. She blinked, then looked back at me, as if trying to make sense of the situation. "What's this?" she asked, her voice faltering for the first time. "What does this mean?" I smiled and stepped a little closer, giving her a moment to digest what was right in front of her. "It means that my yard isn't just unkept. It's a sanctuary, a certified habitat for wildlife. You know, a place for bees, birds, butterflies, and all kinds of creatures to thrive. The National Wildlife Federation recognized it." There was a long, uncomfortable silence as Karen tried to process what I was saying. I could practically see the gears turning in her head. This wasn't the kind of response she was prepared for. She had been expecting a reluctant apology, maybe a promise to mow the lawn immediately, but instead I had just dropped an environmental bombshell on her. "But this is ridiculous." Karen finally managed to say, "You can't be allowed to leave your yard like this. It's a nuisance, it's an eyesore. The HOA won't stand for it." I could hear the panic rising in her voice. The weight of my certification was starting to sink in, and she was scrambling for a way to argue against it. But the truth was, there was no argument. I had outmaneuvered her at every turn. The HOA had no jurisdiction over what I had created, no legal standing to force me to cut the grass or eliminate the wild, free-flowing plants. My yard had a purpose now, and that purpose was officially recognized. "Actually, Karen," I said, my voice calm but firm, "the HOA can't do anything about it. My yard is now a certified habitat, which means it's protected. The National Wildlife Federation supports it, and I'm doing my part to help the environment. It's not just about grass anymore. It's about creating a home for local wildlife." Her face twisted with frustration. She opened her mouth to argue, but the words just wouldn't come out. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was speechless. And let me tell you, that was a moment of pure, unadulterated victory. I had won. Karen's defeat didn't just stop at that awkward exchange. It rippled through the neighborhood. When word got out that I had turned my once neglected lawn into a certified wildlife habitat, people started taking notice. Neighbors who had given me strange looks before now approached me with curiosity, asking how they could do the same. I wasn't just the rebellious homeowner anymore. I was the one making a difference. My yard had become a living, breathing example of what was possible when you looked beyond conventional standards of perfection. Karen? Well, I'm sure she wasn't happy about it. But after our conversation, I didn't see her lurking around my house anymore. She had lost her battle and with it, her power over my yard. But the best part? My neighbors were finally seeing things differently. They weren't just tolerating my wild yard anymore. They were admiring it. Some even started asking about planting their own pollinator-friendly gardens, and a few went as far as to remove their chemical pesticides. My little act of rebellion had sparked a small movement, one that encouraged others to embrace the beauty of nature and reject the sterile, perfectly manicured ideals of suburban life. And that, my friends, is the power of turning a simple act of defiance into something bigger. Sometimes you don't just fight the system, you change it. And that's what I did. Karen never stood a chance.